All right. Hello, everyone. I am Rosalind Brown of Your Wealth Guidance, where we help Black women create their financial independence map and identify the tools for success so you can live life on your own terms. I want to thank you for joining us for another great Money Monday. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, share it with a few of your friends as well, so you never miss a Money Monday. And so today's speaker is near and dear to my heart. I've known for years and years and years, and super excited about all that she's doing. And I think it's really applicable of where we are as we approach the end of the second quarter, the end of the first half of 2023. It's a great time to go back to, the vision boards and all those New Year's resolutions and say, am I on track? Maybe the vision that I had at the beginning of the year is not what I see myself doing or being or that place that I want to be anymore. So we have Robyn Woods, who is on a personal journey to empower women who struggle to find their voice and unleash their fullest potential. How many people can say, yes, that's me? With her insights and unwavering dedication, she ignites a transformation in the lives of her clients, guiding them towards a path of fulfillment, purpose, and unparalleled success. So, as we're looking and we're like, okay, what next? Tell us, how are you working with your clients? What are some of the main issues that clients are coming to you and saying, all right, help me with this?
Yeah. So I think the best way for me to describe it is starting first personally of kind of how I arrived to where I am now with helping other women to be able to make those strategic pivots in their life without really sacrificing their family. So it started for me. I've had, when I think about where I've arrived today, the constant has been the fact that I've been able to pivot, meaning I've been able to, make those shifts that at times may have been very uncomfortable. I've been proactive in a lot of instances, and I've done it afraid. I've done it where, I didn't necessarily have all the answers and I had a lot of doubts and, there were a lot of the odds against me, right? But the constant for my life has been just having the ability to just make shifts in my life when it was necessary. And so where it started for me was number one, working in HR. So my background is in HR of about 15 years now. And I got laid off at the very beginning of my career, because we were going through a shift and, it was pretty much right after I got out of college and, some things, economic, in terms of the economy, so many different things that were going on. Right. And so I ended up getting laid off, and that was the reality for me that, none of this is guaranteed, right? Because I was a box checker. I was the one who, I went for multiple degrees. I went to college. I did everything that I thought that I was supposed to do in terms of being, a young Black woman at the time. That's the way I was raised. I had educators in my family, and I thought that I was just checking off the boxes, doing everything the right way, right? And then only to face the harsh reality of being laid off early on in my career. And so that was the reality to say, hey, none of this is guaranteed. And I never wanted to be in a position where I didn't have a backup plan, to be honest with you. Like, that's where it was for me. And so then as I moved further along, I ended up eventually getting another job. I want to say maybe about 6 months later, I ended up getting another opportunity. I excelled throughout my HR career, but one of the things that I saw, again, that I wanted to avoid personally was to ensure that I would always have options, that I would always have a backup plan, which is why I absolutely love what you're doing. I love the gems. I love the movement that you're doing here on this podcast, on this YouTube channel. It's amazing, Rosalind, by the way. And for me, it was just one of those things where I was like, you know what, I gotta have backup. And so I started seeking other opportunities. I stayed in my job, but I was looking for other opportunities. So I got in real estate investing. I was doing other things here and there just to kind of dabble in entrepreneurship here and there, right? And so eventually it led me to where I am now, where I am, I'm a coach, where I'm helping other women. And I started that while I was working in my HR career. I was helping other women kind of navigate through the workplace, right? Especially women in marginalized communities, like just really helping them to find their voices in the corporate space, as well as just reminding them that, hey, your livelihood could literally be snatched from under you based on an opinion. I'll be
Mm-hmm.
honest with you, just literally based on an opinion. And me working, seeing executives lose their jobs. I've seen VPs all over the organization, right? I knew that no one's job per se was necessarily a guarantee. And so I was always trying to empower other women around me to make pivots, make shifts, and to seek opportunities to where they always had options available to them. Even if that meant having a side hustle, even if that meant having some type of passive income that they were, doing on the side. Whatever it was, I always wanted to empower them to do that. And so now in my coaching business, what I do is I really help women to focus on their well-being. And so that encompasses 5 pillars. And so we hit on financial well-being, emotional, social, occupational, and physical well-being. So we focus on those 5 pillars, and in hopes that if there are areas where a pivot is necessary, right? So we're finding that there's maybe misalignment in one of those areas. We're putting a plan together to be able to make those adjustments and those shifts without compromising their families. Because a lot of times, I know for me, before I even started, I went through coaching. So I hired a coach, or I'm not going to say hired, I invested in a coach, invested in a coach to help me, because there was a lot of uncertainty, right? There was a lot of uncertainty, but I knew that I wanted more. I knew I wanted more income. I knew that I wanted more time with my family. I knew I wanted to be more intentional just with my relationships, building relationships. And I didn't just want to literally be a workaholic, because that's what I was. I was a workaholic and experienced a lot of burnout and stress on my job. And so it took me having to invest to be able to get to that next level. And so now I'm helping other women do exactly the same thing that I did, that I invested in, just 5 years ago.
I think that's so key because we are in this point. And so you talked about when you started your career, and we all started our career kind of the same time. And so in the midst of kind of the last big recession,
Yes.
and you're thinking, go to school, get a degree, be a hard worker, and then you start to realize, especially sitting on the HR side, the hardest worker doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be saving your career. How can people even look at some of those red flags? Because we're kind of in the midst of this uncertainty again. And so as people are saying, I don't know, maybe they're going to let us go. Maybe they let some people go. Maybe I'll be safe because I'm working extra hours. How can either they identify that in advance or start to strategize and put some things in place if maybe they're concerned about their career?
Yeah, yeah. To be honest with you, Rosalind, I would advise that for everybody, literally. And I say that everybody, and I say, unless you're literally the CEO of the organization, I always encourage people to ensure that we're proactive, right? Because in working in HR for 15 years, one thing that I do know that oftentimes, like a layoff, for example, is going to be based on the organization, what they decide. So you may see some employers where they may decide that, hey, maybe it is the underperformers, right? The ones who have, maybe scored poorly over the past year, or over the past couple of years. Maybe they've had a history of underperforming, right? So sometimes that can be a factor. Other factors, it may be, where some employers, they may offer severance packages to, certain groups, depending on, again, the needs of the organization. But it's really tricky, right? Because there's some legality that kind of falls into play with that as well, in terms of those decisions that are made. But I would say for anyone who is trying to, is maybe thinking about it, or maybe they feel that maybe there may be some potential layoffs happening in the near future, I would say, number one, I always encourage people, wherever you are on your job, find opportunities to create value, right? To add value to your current organization. So you don't want to be, I know a lot of people, sometimes we want to be the ones who just kind of, I just come to work and I leave, right? That's all I do, right? I would encourage you to take that extra step, especially if you enjoy where you are. Like if you enjoy where you're working, I would encourage you to tap into those skill sets, those resources that maybe you have that you can share with your organization, or you can be able to add that value to others in the organization. Because number one, people see you, right? Because you want to be visible, you want to be seen. It's important that you're seen, right? I work with a lot of ambitious women, and so oftentimes we are the ones who like we want to make impact. It's not necessarily wanting to be seen, but we want to make impact on other people. And so I would say wherever you can add value, that may just mean being able to step up and be able to offer some insight onto some things that's happening within your industry, right? Maybe some certain things that maybe your employer hasn't even asked you to do, but you're going above and beyond to be able to obtain that information, right? It may mean for some people, sometimes that may mean maybe asking for additional responsibilities, right? Maybe asking for additional assignments, and especially if you know that it's in your area, or maybe some things that may challenge you, because again, it's helping not only the employer, you're adding value to the organization, but you're also adding additional experience to your resume, right? These are opportunities that you can leverage into other areas, into other things that you're doing.
I think that's a really good point. And I think it's also important because as we approach mid-year, how do you make sure that you're saying, hey, I did all these things, I have added all this value, and make sure that people see it and they actually value all the extra work that you're doing, all the extra contribution that you're making?
Yes, that's such a good question. So and this is what I used to tell people all the time. I would tell them, create your brag bank. Okay. You need a brag bank. And oftentimes for us, and I'm going to say what I've experienced with, again, clients, with other women, we don't like to toot our own horn, right? Like oftentimes we kind of stay away from that because it may come off a certain way depending on the culture, right? Thankfully for me, I am working now in a culture where they do embrace that. Like they literally want you to toot your own horn. So like, for example, like my boss, I shared with her that I have a book, and she's like, oh, we're letting everybody know about this book, right? And that wasn't something that naturally for me, I would have been just broadcasting, to my organization. But I would definitely say get a history of the things that you've done. And it may be big, it may be small, whatever it is, take some time to literally document that. I use Microsoft, not Outlook, OneNote. I use OneNote. And anytime someone sends me a kudos, I don't care if it's a simple email. Hey, Robyn, thanks for helping out today. It was amazing. Whatever it is, I take a screenshot of that. I add it to my OneNote and I add it to my brag bank, because if it ever comes back, hey, here are some contributions that I've made. I helped such and such with, pulling together a quick presentation for her team, or, again, it doesn't matter how big, how small, taking record of that, document that information and putting it somewhere so that you can always go back to it, especially around performance review time. Now, here's the other thing. I want to throw this part in here as well. Don't wait until performance review time. A lot of times we wait until, because for most organizations, performance reviews are going to be more so like towards the end of the year, or maybe like mid-year, right? Like they have that once a year type of thing where their boss is kind of talking that, going through what they've done over the year. What I would encourage you to do is being proactive, scheduling time with your boss. I encourage people, schedule that time with your boss and talk through, hey, here are some things that I've done over the past quarter, and I wanted to know, here are some skill sets that I have that I feel that I can bring to the table, or maybe I could build upon those particular skills. Is there anything in the organization, maybe not on our team, but maybe in the organization, where I could be, where I could be able to leverage the skill set, or the experience that I've had over the past, and have that conversation with your boss.
I think that's a really good point. And you actually mentioned your book. And I think this is huge because a lot of our ladies are moms. And so I just dropped the link for the book in the chat as well. And so really structuring motherhood in addition to everything else. I think that's probably one of the harder things, as you're saying, okay, I'm a mom. I have mom responsibilities. I got to do mom things. but I also got to take care of myself. Like, how are you able to do it? And I mean, I'm not a mother, I'm a doggy mom, but that's definitely way different. But it's one of those things that women often feel so stretched that it's hard to prioritize, as you talk about your 5 pillars, when you're just in mommy mode.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for many women, that is part of the problem is that sometimes we operate in autopilot. When I say autopilot, and I'm just humans, right? Like most of us, if we're not really aware of it, we may be operating and showing up a particular way. Oftentimes, what I found, and this is what really got me to even write this book, was that I was operating a certain way based on the expectations of society. So some of us, we may operate a certain way. We may show up as moms. We may show up, again, going back to my box checking, right? Being a box checker, oftentimes it was from an influence in our life, right? So we're trying to make someone happy. We're trying to satisfy. We want to make mama proud, right? We want to make daddy proud. We want to make, grandma proud. And oftentimes we're operating from that place versus operating from a place of what is really true to us. And so once I discovered that for myself, that I was doing some of everything. I was trying to be this mom that my mom was. My mom raised 5 children. She didn't do it by herself, and my dad was in the household as well. But she was a teacher. I mean, she was a church woman. She was the one who was supportive to everybody in the community, right? But the thing that I noticed with my mom is that my mom never took time for herself. And so a lot of that is what I did when I advanced in my career and I began to start a family with my husband. I was doing some of the same things. I was doing some of the, oh, well, maybe I need to be a stay at home mom. So I stayed at home with my daughter for the first year because my mom did, my husband's mom did, right? So I was doing a lot of things operating from a place of what I saw around me, right? But then when I started realizing, I was like, wait a minute, like it was close to a year. I love having the opportunity to be at home with my daughter. But I realized very quickly that being a stay-at-home mom was just not, it was not for me, right? And I commend stay-at-home moms. I love being able to see my children, but I realized that it was just something in me. I wanted to make a larger impact outside of my home. So I still wanted to minister to my home, to my family, to my kids, but I also had a bigger vision for my life. And so I would say for a lot of women, the first thing that we could do for moms just in general is to identify what is true for you, right? What are those things that you really want to do and start operating? Or even those things that you really want to do, or those goals that you have, that vision that you have, taking a step back to really identify, like, who am I? Like, what do I really like? Because the same person that I was before children came into play is not the same person that I am today. It's not. And there were certain things about me that I enjoyed doing prior to that, but I never really took the time to really take a step back and realize, like, hey, I, like my interests have changed. Like some of the things that maybe I used to drink, some of the, and I just as an example, some of the music that I used to listen to, right? Like some of the people that I used to be around, a lot of that has shifted, but it took me literally having to hit a brick wall of i.e. anxiety, burnout, all these other things to kind of happen when I realized that I wasn't really operating in my own truth. And it really boils down to really operating, aligning your life with your values, aligning those goals with your values. And so that's really what I help my clients do, is to align that, take a step back, because a lot of times we just operate in autopilot.
That's a really good point that you make, because when you talked about anxiety, you talked about burnout. I just read a book about burnout. And then I just read a quote. I think it may have been this morning earlier or maybe yesterday. And it talked about Black women are so accustomed to trying to excel that even when they're doing everything and, the weight of the world is on you, instead of recognizing anxiety, instead of recognizing stress and burnout, you just feel like you're failing.
Yes, exactly.
And it's like then you kind of push to do way more. And so when I thought about your 5 pillars, I'm like, what about for the women that are saying, all right, I'm struggling in 4 out of 5 or maybe 5 out of the 5.
Yep.
How do you start to prioritize and say, okay, my health isn't great, my relationships aren't great, my career isn't great, socially I'm not spending time with my friends. So you have like multiple pillars, and you're like, can I address all these things in the same week? Or how do you start to like where do you even start? And I think that's probably a hard one, because when you're just running on adrenaline and just my kids need me, my family needs me, my job needs me. How do you stop and say, okay, wait, I'm going to do something differently?
Yeah. So, and I can attest to this, right? Because I was that girl. I was literally, and I appreciate you sharing that about the book. Please share the book, whatever that book is. I would love to hear about it. But I mean, it's true. And looking back, that's exactly what I did. I remember going through the burnout, going through the anxiety, and just having a lot of times with the mental, right? It starts with the mental, but then it starts to affect you physically. So I remember I had other physical issues, headaches, stomach aches, all these things that were going on, which started feeding into my personal life, right? With my husband, my marriage, my friendships, like all of these things just started happening because I didn't have the energy to be anything to anybody at that point. And so what I began doing, number one, again, going back to starting at identifying, like, is this true to Robyn? Like, what am I doing here, right? So I started there, but then I would encourage my clients. I always say, number one, you got to make time to literally sit down and plan this out. The same way we do, I know a lot of women, they get together and do like vision boards, right? It's something as simple as getting together, doing a vision board. I don't like to like make it complicated. Sometimes we make the whole process of creating your plan for your life or creating a vision for your life extremely complicated. What I do, and as a matter of fact, I have a workshop that's coming up in August, and it's around pivoting. So it's helping women to be able to, again, we're taking a day, we're taking a step back, so we're making time. Number one, when we get to the point we're fed up, where we're like, okay, I can't keep doing this, you know. And those are the women that I work with. I work with the women who are like, okay, I know I have to make a change. I got to move differently. I can't stay here, right? I don't work with the ones who are like, well, who you stay in the space of just complaining, right? Like if you're just complaining, you're just going to stay right where you are. But when I'm more of a solution oriented person, so typically those are the type of people who I work with, and they're like, okay, I got to do something. I got to step back. And so we take a day where we go through those 5 pillars, and we identify like how many pillars, are we feeling? Maybe there's misalignment, right? I always say if there's at least like 2 or more where you're like, okay, this is just not working, we got some work to do. But it's also a process. It's also about giving yourself grace. And so we start out where we ask very specific questions in those key areas around, like, in terms of like financial goals, in terms of your financial goals, very specific questions that we go through. But then what we do in terms of our action plan, we focus on one thing. What can we do? There's a book that I'm listening to now. I'm actually listening to it again, but it's called The 12-Week Year. Can't think of
Oh yeah, yes.
Yes, and it's so funny because I listened to this maybe about a year ago. One of my friends told me about it, and this was the way I started planning out things for my business and for work. It was based on like the whole 12-week year. So I was looking at things more from like a quarterly basis, and so that helped me to be able to execute better versus looking at things. Most of the time we go by the year, right? That's the way corporate has taught us in a lot of instances to kind of go by, the year when we're planning out things. But it's helped me with, number one, being an overthinker. Sometimes I can be an overthinker. So I look at things very granular. And as a matter of fact, sometimes I'll do things like, what does this look like over the next 30 days? How consistent can I be with this over the next 30 days? So I encourage women, when you identify those areas, let's say if you're looking at the 5 pillars, financial, emotional, social, occupational, and physical, if you're looking at those 5 pillars and you determine that there are 3 areas where maybe there are gaps, there are some areas where maybe you may need to shift, maybe you need to rearrange some priorities, maybe you need to set better boundaries, right? Healthier boundaries, and work on one thing. Find one thing that you can work on over a 30-day period, over a 12-week period, right? And start tracking that, right? You want to measure it, because what you measure is not going to grow. And so that's been the thing that's helped me to, I would say, remain consistent in my own personal development journey, is identifying what those areas are, the things that I feel like I need to make some adjustments in, and then baby steps. I don't try to do, when it comes to working out, for example, I remember, and this probably is really good, especially if you're a mom. when my kids were younger. And I remember working probably the most stressful job ever. And both of my kids were under the age of 2. And I remember going to the doctor, and the doctor, they're going to tell you, oh, you got to exercise, right? You got to exercise, you got to eat right. And I'm like, I don't have time for any of that. I don't have time for none of that. Working out and definitely not eating right, because who has time for that, right? I'm working hard and I'm trying to take care of these kids. But one thing that I started doing just to kind of move the needle was with my workout routine. I began doing like 10-minute workouts. Again, I'm an overthinker. And so when I start thinking about, oh, well, you know how some people, they set the standard for like, oh, you got to work out at least 30 minutes a day, right? 5 days a week, all this stuff. I was like, 10 minutes. Let me find a 10-minute video on YouTube that I can watch and literally just move my body. And so I started doing like trap cardio. I don't know if you've ever heard of trap cardio.
I'm like, no, but I need to look that one up.
I love. So I would do like dance videos like on YouTube.
Right now, I'm like, okay, I'm not doing it.
It's really good. It's really, really good. So trap cardio, it was another girl that I was following, but I would follow them and just do like 10, 15 minutes of working out. And then my kids, they were young. And so sometimes, they were crawling. Sometimes they would be trying to dance with me or crawl up under me or whatever the case was. And so I began to try to incorporate them in that workout routine, right? Just so I could be able to have that time. And so over time, gradually, I began to love it, number one, because I hated it at first. I did not like it. I did not enjoy it. But I made it fun. So I was doing something that I actually enjoyed doing. And I gradually worked my way up into the point where now I'm working out at least 4 times a week. And I say my minimum is at least 20 minutes every 4 days, 4 days a week. And so that's helped me tremendously to be able to be more consistent. But again, that goes back to knowing yourself. Knowing yourself, like, is this something that I really want to do, right? Or, what can I do that's going to excite me? What can I do to make it more compelling enough to me to even want to work out on a consistent basis?
I think that's a really good point to make, like just the 10 minutes. Because sometimes it's like, I ain't got 30. You look at the clock and you're like, I ain't even got time to sweat. I don't even want to do, all the
that part. Stretching. I would even say now there have been times where if I couldn't get 10 minutes in, like let's say we traveled, we went out of town, I'm like, I know I gotta do something. Girl, because the body don't be bodying the way that it used to. So I have to do, like, sometimes I'm like, okay, let me just do 10 minutes. 10 minutes of yoga. I find a 10-minute yoga video and just, find opportunities to stretch, So whatever works for you, but finding something that is working for you and not based off of what everybody else says, right? Because a lot of times we feel bad about it. We judge ourselves because of the fact that we're not working out. We don't get that good sweat in, right? And then we feel bad about it, and then we don't do it at all.
I think it's one spectrum where people are like, I can't do anything. Like I have no free time. I can't do anything. But then there's the other spectrum of people, especially like the overachievers. And we're like, all right, starting Monday, I'm working out 30 minutes. I'm about to get a second degree. I'm gonna get a certification. I'm gonna start a business. Yeah. I'm gonna, schedule time, see my friends once a week, all those kind of things. So what about the people on the other end that are like, oh, okay, yeah, when I look at my 5 pillars, I am not excelling in 4 out of the 5. I'm about to fix them all in 30 days.
Girl, so that is a recipe for disaster. I would say that because, again, from experience, that was me. And thankfully, I had a coach to guide me. I'm so glad you asked that question. Yeah, I had a coach to guide me along that journey because I was ready to just let's go. Let's knock it out. Like, I got all these areas. I know what I need to do, right? After she kind of worked with me and helped me kind of dig a little bit deeper. And I was ready to go. But I think having some mentor, some coach, someone who you can kind of bounce some of these things off of just to make sure that you're not overdoing it. Because again, when you're an overachiever, oftentimes we ready to tackle the problem instantly. And that's just not, when you really look at the whole personal development and the growth journey, it's a long game. It's a long game. And I'm learning that every day. I'm literally having to remind myself that it's a long game. And I have to give myself grace to know that, some of this is just gonna take time. And now it's second nature for me. In most areas of my life, I will honestly say that I feel satisfied, I'm fulfilled in what I do and how I show up every day, because I allowed myself, number one, to go through the process of taking a step back and getting clear about those things that I needed to change, but then also working my way up to the point where I really want it to be. So again, it may started out at 10 minutes a day, right? 4 days a week, but now 20 to 30 minutes before every 4 days, every four times a week. Sorry. So yeah. So that, I think that's the biggest thing, is just really giving yourself grace. And I would encourage people to just work with someone, mentor, coach, anybody, a best friend, anybody that can kind of, number one, hold you accountable, but then also making sure that you're executing within reason, that you're not overexerting yourself and doing too much at one time. Because my coach was the one to always pull me back. She would tell me, Robyn, you're doing too much. You're doing too much. Take a step back, right? And give yourself that grace that you need to grow.
And especially for people, you talk about having the support, and I'm a firm believer in support. And it's funny, I did an interview a couple months back, and the lady is posting it, and she sent me the draft. I was like, I forgot I said that. And it's having accountability buddies and having your circle, but sometimes it's not your circle that'll be the people to kind of support you through. So sometimes it's hiring a coach, but then also sometimes explaining to your friends about, one, what you need from them, but then also being the support to push your friends as well. How do you best coach your friends to be your support? I think that's really important.
Oh, good. Yes, it is, because you have to let people know. Like I think to your point, being able to communicate. But see, this is where I go back to knowing yourself, because I struggle with being able, number one, to set boundaries, right? To be able to clearly communicate boundaries to certain friends, because a lot of times, as we get older, as we get more immersed in our career and the things that we're doing, sometimes we're not able to be as available as we once were, right? We may not be able to make all the parties, all the social gatherings, everything that's happening. And so, but we have to get clear about those areas where we can say no, right? Like at what point do we draw the line where we can be able to communicate in a loving way to our friends, our family, and let them know, hey, I love you, but there's some other things that I have going on right now in my life that I'm really trying to focus on, whatever that may be, right? That was me. I didn't know what my boundaries were, so I could not communicate the boundaries. Same way with my husband. And I would say anybody, let's say if you have a spouse and a significant other, it's the same way. You got to know yourself. You got to be able to know who you are, what you like, what's really resonating with you before you can set boundaries with people. You have to know that on your job. I didn't know that. I was just operating. I was just moving. I was just a go-getter, right? And so I was saying yes to everything. I was used to always just saying, oh, I'll take that. I'll do this. I'll do that. I'm that girl, right? And to the point where I ended up hitting that burnout cycle. So I would say understanding yourself, knowing yourself, and then being able to communicate that to your people. But I will say one point that you just brought up was that for some of us who were very similar to people in my situation, I did not necessarily have a circle of friends, like let's say in my space, like where I am right now, like in terms of location, right? So I didn't necessarily have people where I am to, let's say if I want to work out, to hold me accountable or to let them know, hey, I'm trying to get up at, 6 a.m. in the morning. At one point in time, I was trying to do that. 6 a.m. in the morning, I need you to get up, because I didn't have a lot of people around me who was just trying to get up at 6 a.m. in the morning, right? So I had to go outside of my circle, outside of those areas that I was familiar with, and find people who had similar goals, right? Who had similar aspirations, who were more committed to getting up at that time in the morning. Now, I'll be honest with you, I did not stick to that. I had to know myself, and I was just not that girl to be getting up at 6 a.m. to go work out. And I'm okay with that now, right? I used to feel bad about, because you hear people talking about, oh, I get up at 6 a.m., 5 a.m. to go work out. That's not Robyn anymore. I can't do that. So I think being able to, if you have friends who are kind of in that same space, they have similar goals, similar aspirations as you do in your circle, by all means, definitely communicate. You got to be vulnerable, transparent with people to let them know where you are. and let them know what you need, what kind of support you need. But then also, to your point, Rosalind, being able to also offer that same support, so it's reciprocated. You got to be able to offer that help to other people that you're asking for to help. So, and if you're not able to find that in your circle, then being able to go out of your comfort zone. For a lot of people, you got to get out of your comfort zone, right? And seek other communities and groups where people are doing that, so that you can be able to have that support.
That's a really good point, especially from the workout perspective, because one, I've had people where I'm like, hey, are we gonna get up and go? And then all it takes is for that one day for them to be like, no, not today. And you be like, whoo, good.
Yes.
And then y'all never go again. That's it.
Exactly. That would be multiple times. So yeah.
But being in HR, there's a lot of ladies who want to make career pivots. And it could either be because they're not feeling fulfilled, not making enough money. We've had people to come and talk about kind of moving into tech or moving. A wonderful speech a little while ago about somebody who was in corporate and she moved into trucking. And so like these dynamic pivots that may not be connected at all to what you spent 4 years in college and all this time maybe on a graduate degree and maybe 15 years in corporate doing. So if you're looking to do something maybe totally different, a whole new pivot, what would be your recommendations to prepare and to be successful in that type of change?
Oh, so good. I just love pivots like that, by the way. Like, I love to see those success stories where people, like you say, it's a complete 180 in terms of where they land. And I would say, number one, if you're in Atlanta, you need to come to my workshop in August. It's called Shifts in Success. And so this is a workshop that I'm literally speaking to that. I'm speaking to those women who are ready to shift either in their career, they're ready to shift maybe jobs, they're ready to advance, or like you say, they're just maybe ready to start a completely different business and not exactly sure how to get started or how to successfully, transition into that space. The first thing I would say is to identify if a pivot is truly necessary. Oftentimes where you find pivots being necessary are going to be those areas where it's like that pain point, right? Where you call the pain points. It's when you think about someone fitting a hand into a glove, right? Like it, for whatever reason, it just does not fit. No matter how many times you try to fit that glove on, it's just not fitting right. Or the shoe's just not fitting right on that foot. For whatever reason, you love it, and you feel like this may be what you need to do, but for whatever reason, it's just not fitting right. I would say that's one of the first signs. The other sign may be if you're in an environment, you're in a space, you're doing something, and it is just not fulfilling to you. Like you say, for whatever reason, it's just not. Like for whatever reason, you're fired. You're missing that spark. You're missing that spark in terms of what you're doing, or wherever you are in terms of your job, in terms of that business. It's not bringing out the best of you. It's not bringing out your best. I'll give an example of where I was working again in my HR career at the time. This is towards the latter part. Went into a role making six figures, and everything on the outside sounded great. Anybody who talking, oh my God, I'm proud of you, leadership position, right? I was over different regions, and I mean, it was great. Had the opportunity to meet with so many different people. On the outside, it would have been the perfect job, right? But inside, I was torn up. Internally, it just did not settle. It was just not a good fit for me internally in terms of the culture. And I tried to fight it again because I'm like, no, I got to make this money. I'm in this role. Like, it makes more sense for me to just stay. Like, I would be a fool to leave it, right? But again, when it starts hitting you internally, eventually it's going to start affecting you either mentally or physically, right? And so when you start getting to that point where it's affecting you physically, mentally, it's affecting your relationships, that may be the time for you to pivot, sis. That may be that power pivot. That's when it's time to make that pivot. And then once you made the decision that, okay, I've got to pivot, start looking at your skills, start looking at some of your experiences, or maybe even some of your interests that you may have. For some people, for example, for me, because of the fact, and as I said, I kind of pivoted more so into my book, and my book has opened up so many doors, and it's opened up so many opportunities that I never would have even imagined, to be honest with you. But a lot of this for me started before I left. So before making that transition, start seeking those areas where you may have an interest, or where maybe, again, you have this skill set. Maybe you went to college. Maybe you always wanted to pursue a particular role in a particular field, in a particular area. Maybe you don't necessarily have the experience yet. Maybe you need to start networking and connecting with people in that particular area to kind of help give you some guidance, right? Or listening to podcasts. So many resources. Like, that's what I love about, like, the world that we live in today, is that everything is just so accessible. Like, information is so accessible. And so I would encourage you to start making small shifts, right? Like, those small shifts lead into larger shifts in the long term, but to not be so quick to move based off of your emotion. So some of us, we may not necessarily be happy, right, in our job. But I would say, find your happy, find some kind of way you can, get some kind of fulfillment in what you're doing. Even if it's not necessarily on your job, you may start a side hustle. And maybe that's going to be the space where you can, a podcast, right? I've known some people, I've had some clients where they started just doing a podcast because they were just so dissatisfied with their work. And so doing a podcast is something that they actually enjoy. They began to thrive and be able to position, they were able to build their businesses and position and shift into that space and lead their career, right? Others, it may not necessarily mean you leaving your career altogether, but maybe just having that side hustle may just be the spark that you need, to kind of keep you happy and keep you a little bit more harmonized in terms of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis.
And that's a good point, because it may not be that you just, go out. And I think there's two things, because oftentimes people are like, I'm fearful to just do the full pivot. So for those that are like, I'm fearful to even make the first step, how do you address and combat fear?
Oh, girl, I love this. Experimentation. I love experimenting. I love, love, love. And I tell people all the time, we got it. It's a growth mindset, right? It's a growth mindset. And I always tell people, go read the book. It's by Carol Dweck. It's Mindset by Carol Dweck. And this is where I started, because when I was looking for answers, when I remember, working in a role where I'm like, I'm scared to leave, right? I'm scared to transition. I had a photography business at the time. I remember this is back early on in my career. I had a photography business, and I was like, well, I think I want to shift, and move into my photography business. I'm so glad I did not do that full time. But I was so miserable in my job that I, emotionally, I was like, I'm just going to leave. I just want to leave, right? And I remember looking for answers just to try to figure out, like, what do I need to do? Like, where's the insight? What can I do to, get through this particular situation that I'm in of just not being happy on my job? And I started listening to that book. And I'm saying listen because I do a lot of audiobooks now, being a mom. But
yeah.
So Carol Dweck, Mindset, and that was the thing that really shifted my thinking in terms of, just taking on new experiences, new opportunities in my work, in my business, in the way I show up, even with the way I raise my children, has been around more of a growth mindset. And so what I do is experiment on things. If it's something that I'm like, it may be a slight interest that I may have in that particular area, I'll give myself 30 days. Let me just see what happens. Let me just, if it's a podcast that I want to try. Matter of fact, I started my podcast. So I have a podcast as well, Wine and Mastermind podcast. And I started it because I hosted a summit last year. I'm going to even go back even further than that. My summit, I said, let me just try out this summit. I want to try out a virtual summit and just see where it goes, right? And what I did, I called one of my friends because I saw that she hosted something very similar. So she kind of gave me some of the, the ins and outs of what I needed to do. And I said, I'm going to give myself, at that time, I gave myself 2 months to basically plan it out. And just to kind of see, it was kind of on a smaller scale, right? I wasn't trying to do anything grand, but I was like, let me just do maybe like 2 to 3 days. And I planned the summit. I had 5 speakers. It was so fulfilling for me. It was so impactful for other women who joined the summit. But the thing about that summit was, I learned a lot, number one, in terms of the do's and don'ts moving forward. I learned that this was something that doing a virtual summit was probably not necessarily something that was going to be like the most exciting for me. Like, I prefer more in person. I prefer more in person. Not to say I wouldn't do it, but that was just it allowed me to see kind of like what was the thing that I would be more drawn to, right? But then on top of that, when I hosted the summit, the last day of the summit was the opportunity that I learned about attending a book conference. Only because I ended up putting myself out there. I put myself out there. People saw, they heard about my conference, about my summit at the time, and so I was contacted by someone who invited me to attend this book writing conference. I had already had in my mind that I wanted to write a book. I had already been sharing it with other people, journaling about it since 2007, but I never really put it out there. And the fact that I took that one step of just planning this summit, it opened up the door for me to be exposed to a completely different world. So I ended up attending this conference, was exposed to other women who were doing like powerhouses, like out there getting it, sis, like, writing books, building businesses, building culture business, all kind of things around their books, growing their careers. And it inspired me to write my book. And so now writing a book has opened up so many doors for me. But again, I didn't see that a year ago when I decided just to write, just to start a summit, right? Just to actually just test it out and just see if I liked it, what was going to be the impact, and go from there. So I would encourage anybody, and again, you don't have to necessarily start at a summit. Let me just say that. Don't start at a summit.
Just
I
start.
would encourage you. Just start somewhere. Start anywhere, right? And give yourself a window of time that's reasonable for you. And just take some mini steps. Some people, and I'm going to share this one last thing. I did a live last week where I was talking about getting your reps in, because a lot of people, when you see influencers show up on social media, you see people with their channels, their podcasts, right? And it looks like they were like these overnight successes, but the reality is they had to get their reps in. A lot of them are still getting their reps in, and I say I'm one of them. But it started with me doing very small videos. I would do 30-second videos. Then it started going to a minute, 2 minute, 3 minute. Now I don't mind talking on camera. But it literally, a lot of people are intimidated by, communicating on camera. But I'm going to tell you something, kind of going back to your question about ways that you could really leverage, maybe your experience. Let's say if you're working for somebody who maybe they may be thinking about laying off people, right? Like when you can get on camera, when you can be visible, when you can show yourself, those are things that nobody can take away from you, right? Like that's a skill set. That's a particular skill set. And a lot of people, we hide. I was one of them. We hide. We don't want to be on camera. We don't want to show our faces to others for different reasons. We all have, different thoughts and different insecurities. But it took me having to literally take many micro steps of experimentation to get to where I am now, where I could just click that live button and get on and start talking to anybody. So, yeah.
And that's a good point, because I know there's usually what can you do an automatic speech on for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And sometimes that's how you can figure out where your passion is, because you might be able to talk about hair or nails or health, and you're doing HR and you're like, okay, this is not the automatic topic that you would think of. And if it's not, that might be when it's time to go to that experimental phase. So experiment and see if that's where you need to go next. It might even be child rearing. So maybe you had natural childbirth, or maybe you have an autistic child, or so many different things, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, I'm an expert in another area that I didn't even think about.
From your own personal experience. It's literally from your own personal experience. And that's exactly what I'm doing now with my book. Like this, I didn't go to school, right? I didn't have to go to school to talk to other women about how to prioritize your well-being. This took me having to go through the experience of the burnout, of the anxiety, right? And so now I can share that story with other women. We all got a story. We all have some story, some experience that we can share with others. And so if there's a particular individual, if you have an interest in one particular place, it could be bike riding. You literally get on camera and take a minute and talk about maybe something that you've done with your bike, or the tools that you use. There's so many things that you can do just to start tapping into that passion as well as the purpose, right? Because a lot of us, that's where the purpose lies.
I think that's a really good thought, and just process to say, I didn't even know that was my thing. Like, I didn't know. Because there are people that might call on you for something, and it could be planning an event, and your day job is you're an engineer, and you're like, I'm tired of being an engineer, but I love planning these events. well, that could be your next pivot. That could be your next thing, and just trying to find out, because so many people are just burnt out from what they're doing today. But they're like, but I don't know what next. Like, I don't, I'm not fond of where I am, but at the same point in time, I'm not ready to like pivot 100%. So I think it's, even just being able to have that discussion with yourself, because part of it is, an internal discussion. And sometimes we're looking for somebody to say, all right, tell me what next. Tell me what I should major in. What's the next thing?
Absolutely. And let me just add to that, because I think oftentimes, just in my experience with working with other women, is that just men and women, just in general, sometimes we are afraid to pivot because I think in some instances, and this has been my experience in working in corporate, when you're decisive in terms of making a decision, right? Like I know some corporations, they're really big about, you make this decision, we're gonna keep going. This is the decision that you made, you're gonna stick to this decision, right? Versus I've seen some of the most successful companies be the ones who are willing to pivot and make multiple pivots. They're not fixated on one particular decision. But again, a lot of us are trained to be that way, because you think about, again, go back to the degrees, right? We're trained to get that degree, get that job, and stay in this role, and that's life. Now you've reached your peak. This is success. This is what success looks like. But what I'm doing is more so empowering women to think about it differently. Think about pivots as being progress. Pivots does not mean you're quitting. Pivots just mean you're just making strategic shifts, right? Well, if you're strategic about it, but the way I teach my clients is more being strategic about making those moves versus just like shifting and shifting, and then you have no, you really don't have a plan in place while you're making those pivots. And so I say be more strategic about it before making those shifts.
And then I know we are right up against time, but how would someone work with you? So, what would be the steps? I always say, one, somebody's going to watch this and say, yep, I want to talk to her. But one, what are the things they need to do to prepare for that conversation? So we've had some people and they're like, yeah, call me for a 15-minute conversation. I'm like, don't just call today. Like, be prepared, write some notes, write some things, be prepared to make that conversation impactful. So how would one prepare for a conversation with you? And then how would one work with you as well?
Yeah. So I would say in preparation, it would be determining, like, do I need to make a pivot, right? Like, is there something, because I like to work with people. If you know that you are ready to make a shift, and maybe you haven't even identified like what that shift is yet, maybe you need help with brainstorming and kind of coming up with what that next move may be for you. To where, again, I always go back to women who I work with. We don't want to sacrifice our families, right? We don't want to sacrifice too much of our time because we already don't have enough time. How do we do it without necessarily sacrificing our income? Like, how can we make those shifts? And so if you're that person where you want to make that shift, you want to make a change, I would say that would be the time to call me. That would be the time to reach out to me. And you can shoot me a DM, but you can also go to robyn@winemastermind.com to shoot me an email, and we can have a discussion about that. I would also encourage you to, in preparation, you can check out, I'm sharing a free chapter of my book. So my book is Boss Moms Move Differently. And so in one of the chapters of my book, I'm talking about the power of pivots. And so I actually go into pretty good detail about the things that you need to assess to determine, like, hey, is a pivot, am I really ready for this shift, or am I just making a decision based on emotion, right? Is this just more of an emotional decision? So you can go to bmmdbook.com/free to download a chapter from the book. So you're going to download the chapter, which is titled The Power of Pivots. So that would be, I would say, probably the number one way to really think about it is to go check that chapter out. And then if you feel like, yes, I'm ready to move forward, to make these shifts where that I can make more impact in my life, I can grow more income, more influence in my life, I can build better relationships, I can prioritize myself, right? I can learn how to prioritize my well-being and really focus on those 5 pillars of my life so that I can be better for everybody else around me. I would say definitely reach out to me. So you can reach out, Robyn@winemastermind.com. Again, that's going to be my email. Or you can simply check me out on Facebook, I'm on Facebook, I'm Robyn Jones Woods, or on Instagram, as you can see it here, under my name, it says at the Robyn Woods. So you can check me out and shoot me a DM. I would love to hear from you.
Perfect. So definitely all those things. I dropped the email in there. The podcast is in there. The link to the book is in there. One more question. What about people who say it's too late for me? So we have some ladies that might be later in their career. So they've invested 20, 30 years in this career. They've invested 30, years into shaping this lifestyle. And they're like, it's too late for a pivot for me. Like that's for the young girls, maybe not for me. What do you say to those people that are saying, I don't know, it might be too late for me? Like I'm tired of where I am, but I can't make a change now.
Yeah. So number one, in my opinion, I feel like that the more experience you have under your belt, the more of an opportunity there is for you to be able to make a successful pivot, multiple successful pivots. I would say that, number one. Number two, if you are feeling like that, I would say it's going to start with establishing a growth mindset, a growth mentality. I would purchase the book. I would listen to the book, Mindset by Carol Dweck. It will change your perspective around just looking at life, looking at your life in that manner. Because again, it really talks about nothing is just, constant. Nothing is necessarily, sometimes we remain stagnant, and it's based on the way we limit ourselves, right? So we limit ourselves, we put ourselves in this box, and that's what makes us stagnant. And so when you start really looking at opportunities where you can grow, the opportunities are really endless. They really are, but it's all about how you see it. It's all about perspective. And so for me, that was the book that really helped to shift my perspective in terms of thinking that way. So because I was that person at one point in time where I was like, I don't have anything else to do. I got this degree. What else can I do with this degree? Right. I didn't really see any other paths outside of that. But I think once you start shifting your perspective, things will start coming to you, and you'll start seeing these different opportunities all around you, literally all around you, personally, professionally, that you can tap into. And sometimes it may mean just getting that extra support from a mentor or a coach to help you just to be able to navigate and see how to move forward.
I love it. So again, on Amazon, you can go to Boss Moms Move Differently is the book. So all of you boss moms, even your doggy fur moms, we can get some stuff from the Boss Moms Move Differently book. Love, love, love it. And you can contact Robyn directly at robyn@wineandmastermind.com. Be sure to follow her on Instagram. Check out the podcast. So we are like all over the place, and get the information. I always say sometimes we're sitting on the fence. We're like, all right, maybe I'm gonna sign up. I'm gonna do something differently. One, she said that her mastermind is in August, so you got some time to check her out, filter and see, is this where I need to be? Is this who I'm supposed to be coupled with for my next step, for my pivot? Check her out. And then in August, you can be a part of the mastermind. So I want to thank you so much, Robyn, for being with us today. Meant the world to me. And I know the ladies got some stuff out of it, because I'm like, all right, I wrote a few notes too. I'm like, trap cardio. Girl, I might do some trap cardio.
Let me know what you think about it. I would love to hear.
Maybe doing some of that tonight. Let me see what I can come up with. So until next time, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight, and I will see you on the next Money Monday. Have a good night.
Rosalind, thank you so much, everyone.